Ola's practice is partly informed by her academic training. She has a current teaching role at an institution in The Hague called the KABK Royal Academy of Art in its Department of Interior Architecture and Furniture Design. And she's had an artistic residency before that, a fellowship, and has been associated with another institution at HK University, the University of the Arts in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Her work has been exhibited at exhibitions, including one called the Bureau Stedelijk in 2024, Head Hartwig Art Foundation event in 2021, and a Chicago and Sharjah in the Gulf architecture events. She works on the idea, she says, of space as political discourse, an expanded notion of space, which she says tries to develop spatial literacy, which can aid us in imagining different political ecologies. Ola, let me pass to you. You have a presentation, and if you want to add anything further by way of introduction, please do. Thank you. Ola, over to you.
Thank you for this, Jim. I'm going to start off by basically saying that I perceive the involvement of women in civil society through a development of spatial literacy. So through space, or through a building of a conscious sort of understanding of space. And in light of what has been happening now in Sudan, I think now more than ever, it would be appropriate, I think, to sort of think of space, since it's where our lives unfold, and it's also the biggest political project that we inhabit. You know, we are all also aware that there are spatial underpinnings also for this conflict as well. And so I think it has been important to me to kind of try to look at involvement of women through creating a spatial literacy or developing a spatial vocabulary that allows for us to sort of navigate under this current material condition. And also allows for us to, I guess, maybe a better way to put it, to kind of allows for us to sort of be aware of what the coming, like post-war political projects might be predicated on. And that allows us also to engage in modes of strategizing and developing platforms of transmission of information where spatiality is kind of common knowledge also to people. And I feel like this can kind of create a future trajectory where women are not sort of expelled from spaces, and that we know that also with the past regime, and the first speaker had mentioned that, Sazamira also had mentioned that space has always kind of been a contested thing, also in terms of regulating bodies and public spaces and so on and so forth, with the public law order and things like that. So there is also a history of our bodies being entangled with fixed understandings of spatiality under the current political condition. One of the kind of central questions or things that I'm thinking about is inhabiting. So how do we get to live under systemic violence and under military interventions that's very much propped up by how Sudan is also fragmented in terms of planning, and that has enabled a lot of the military encroachments and made it much more easy, I guess, also. So I've been just trying to answer this question of, under the wake of this expansion of armed conflict in Sudan, the question of uninhabitability and inhabitability is becoming more and more pressing amidst increasing weather and man-made catastrophes that threaten human and non-human life in Sudan. And spatial practices like architecture and urban planning are at the forefront of imagining what a sustainable and equitable future might look like beyond the current catastrophes. Architecture and urban planning are equally also complicit in designing the build configurations that would facilitate militarized urbanization. Architectural drawings and the means of, the creative regime of representing buildings and design ideas and so on and so forth represent a future as already real, right? And it represents it as a sort of condition of the now. And we see that through renderings and things like that. And they also provide pathways to bring it into physical being. So it's a very interesting position, I think, that has us looking double ways. We're present, but we can always kind of engage with future trajectories through the medium of architectural representation. But unfortunately, Annie, we've always been kind of we've had this idea, at least through my own architectural education, and I've transitioned into more of a visual practice to sort of explore the possibilities of generating, expanded understandings of space. There is an idea that, architecture can also be curative, right? It can also resolve ecological crises, and it asks us to sort of reconsider the specific, and that reality asks us to reconsider the specific unspoken NGO imaginaries that animate and shape the visions of the proposed better future. And the dominant narratives of like peace talks and sterile political analysis and mainstream accounts of economic globalization of catastrophe. I've in the past written texts around architectures of uninhabitability, so how this condition is kind of maintained and perpetuated. And I actually argue that the main catastrophe is actual ecological emptying. The material condition is really premised on eviction and removal of people from certain geographies by, of course, different mediums. We are now experiencing, a war condition, but it also happens through, economic crashes and so on and so forth. There has been a steady flow of immigration outside, people exiting Sudan also because of conflict in different regions, but because also of financial difficulty. And so I've been kind of really inspired by trying to answer like, well, technically, where do people get to go, right? Where do people go under that material condition? And so the question of where do people go, gets answered by that when they leave somewhere, they will have to reintegrate back into cities. And so what is happening now is also kind of the slow sort of movement of people living back into cities. And I think that kind of also makes the attention on spatiality and developing certain literacies around space with communities that are affected, particularly by crises, necessary. It makes it important and makes it maybe worthwhile delving into. But we need to remember those sort of non-urban subjects who keep adding to the urban population. And yet in 10 years, the stories of these people and histories could possibly be forgotten. And this is what I mean by the ecological emptying. And I think this is kind of, for me, I guess also the motivation of being interested in space as a kind of way of participation in society is that, it can't just be, that can't be it, people's stories and histories and accumulated cultural values should find a way to kind of continue and last as well, because that also will offer people guidance into surviving the dispossession. So these people will be, urban subjects without any trace of their past, possibly, hopefully not. For me, this is a very ambiguous and unsettling period when where we come from would not matter. What exactly is the political bearing of the population's suffering, killing, and terrorizing of unarmed civilians? Why are we treated like we're always in the way of political projects that need us to inhabit them? Which brings me back to the term of inhabiting, obviously, since spatiality of inhabiting is rendered impossible under the current circumstances for a big majority, I've been trying to articulate what the parameters of inhabitability under this condition would be. And I think for civil society, inhabiting should extend itself to a set of actions and initiatives embodied in a role. So we get guided by inhabiting being kind of only within the parameters of our own body. And so we take on certain commitments, roles that we can inhabit, and that should be supported by developing spatial justice consciousness. And I think I've shaped three kind of islands within my practice, that kind of, knowledge that's generating kind of meanders around them and kind of sometimes cuts through. And that is artistic research through the visual practice and the mode of exhibiting. And that allows me to kind of get a punctuation in the research where then I can kind of summon certain subjectivities. And these can be communities, other, local communities, other communities of peers, researchers. And then we can gather around a moment of reflection and possibility of showcasing and sort of understanding the intricacies of all what we've kind of gathered. The third fraction is the applicability and possibility that's inherent in some of the concepts or conceptual frameworks that come from artistic research. And this is a role I take, or I guess a hat I wear also within a transnational capacity in Urban Front. And so this is where kind of, you can work alongside certain governance entities and target communities. You can get commissioned or approached by people to kind of work around what kind of platforms we can kind of set up to transmit certain information, whether it be across, like horizontally across reaching out or communicating with other community councils or so on and so forth, or a possibility of taking up a role of certain mediations with state representatives. And then the third and final island would be pitching curriculums. So there's always a pedagogical thread that comes out of these two roles that I inhabit that has some form of teachable value. And so, every 2 years or every year or so, there's a certain kind of set of classes or a curriculum that's built that's then pitched to institutions and, cultural institutions as well, where there's a possibility to kind of disseminate this information. Should there not be a moment of an opportunity doesn't arise to be in direct kind of contact with local communities. And of course, that has been greatly, obviously disrupted with what's been happening in Sudan, because my work has primarily been between Amsterdam and Khartoum. So I think one of the ways also, I guess, are strategies to sort of, allow for the knowledge to flow through all three islands is to identify certain resonances. And these are basically moments where, there are other, you kind of offer possible engagement with what's already there. And it's really about, identifying also different knowledge pools where you can form certain solidarities, may be economic, knowledge-based, capacity building, but it's really about work that's already kind of been done and not really landing on people with ideas and sort of, as the expert or whatnot, but really trying to see what people have set up through their eyes and trying to understand, I guess, also certain communities through their eyes as well. And so the artist or architect builds a lens for us to see what is around us with all its complexity and entanglements. And, usually these are, they take quite humble forms, that's not really, it's really about the dedication of time and being quite observant to the changes and shifts that happen to our built environments, and the conditions under, I guess also ruptures and conditions under which these changes and shifts happen. So what was going on, who was involved in big, some of these big shifts and changes. So I think, maybe to kind of make it brief with like these three islands is that art and culture, firstly, art and culture contribute to propagating for these ways of seeing how our lives are, unfolding within these enclosures of the spatial organizations of the urban or the rural or the in-between. And then the working within the role of consulting and consultant in Urban Front allows for this sort of transnational agency, because this is, what we've inherited also as political difficulties and also as limitations presented by the creative regimes that we've inherited, whether it be the type of education that we got and whatnot, always bring up blind spots. And so transnational agency also allows for you to kind of get to see with a sort of, get to be engaging, I guess, also in practice and conversations where you get a sort of new set of eyes, right? So you get to break away from what's shielding you from understanding. And, because of the, I guess, also colonial history that we share with other African geographies, a lot of things can be predicted, right? And they can be avoided or even replicated in different geographies. So there's a lot to learn and also a lot to test and challenge through transnational agency. But of course, ultimately being able to connect and find new ways and strategies. And then the pedagogical threads moves the role from, this actionability in consulting into frameworks also that can enter into institutions and then kind of, remain in our kind of educational structures. And so it can kind of trickle down as something to be given through generations, and a sensibility that can also transform. But it's important that it plants a seed of awareness of spatiality as also part and parcel of our existence within civil society. But of course, conflict is an exceptional artistic director, I feel. Under conflict, there are also, of course, needs and desires and opportunities that arise and urgencies. And to fill those wants through markets that range the spectrum from righteously open and bright to superstitiously black. Civil actions lack the deterring statement of a criminal prosecution when global powers and global markets can purchase their way out of a self-inflicted wound from participation in rings in man-made catastrophe. So there's always a kind of a bit of a tension between, also our position in civil society, especially if we are facing something that can completely remove you from your environment in a matter of, days, which is what has happened now and what's been happening in different regions also in Sudan. So what do we basically say to, like young people, or what do we say to communities so that kind of engagement with their surrounding happens? And that there's obviously an ecology that's present there. But when I say engagement with their surrounding, I'm specifically talking about built form. So the logics of spatial organization, so that ecology, and not necessarily what comes also trickling down through cultural heritage. So this type of work has had a kind of repetitive calling for restitution. And that's maybe a place, a spot where we can start, I guess, is that we have to start making demands for restitution of our cities, even the ones that have been destroyed. So basically demands of trying to understand what will get built first are the homes of people that have been destroyed, whether through the floods like in Jazeera Aba, or the direct shelling that's been happening. So we really, how would we frame our demands so that we can start engaging with that? And then it, of course, poses the question of like, can we actually restitute relationships to our cities, towns, and villages, and everything that's kind of materially lost? Can architecture become a direct extension of human ecology in order for our inherited knowledges to actually matter? I can show a small short video of the solo show in Bureau Stedelijk, because I kind of was trying to capture some of these questions.
My family were, fleeing from inside the capital city, Khartoum, and they were going to Jazeera district, which is where my grandmother's house is located. And I think the reality of like fleeing a moment of war and conflict to go to somewhere that, you're supposed to kind of find shelter and find safety, but to arrive to something that's collapsing. It became important to look at like what was actually happening in the location of this site of where now my grandmother's house lies, or let's say the rubble of where my grandmother's house lies. What was happening during this time? And this is where it made sense to kind of focus on certain temporalities and see how that can materialize in the work. It wasn't really a matter of looking at the cracks, but really what kind of strategizing that also evokes with it. I think that with this work, I also wanted to kind of, draw both parallels between the crack and in the interior of the house, and to put it also alongside the architecture, that remains, of course, sound and intact, of water control, like the dam itself. And just to see what these images brought together, what kind of tension comes out from this, and what they would tell me. That there's always a role of watching water, watching cracks, watching debris that tells you something, and to say that, you engage by watching as a way of listening, and not really it's a looking and that's it. It's an engagement of also dedicating time. The water comes with this debris, it comes with this with these minerals that also form different patterns to the erosion of the layers of soil. And I wanted to really capture that moment and really allow for for you to see the different patterns, forms of like deviation routes of water, different pressures of the water. I thought it would be really interesting to take a compartment of the design of the Sinnar Dam and try to bring it into contact with what I deem as certain reparative gestures and rituals that were practiced inside the house. One was ruqya, which was always done in like forms of whispers and reading of prayers and sometimes Quranic verses over water surfaces. And so the whispers and the sound of reading and praying over the water point towards a kind of a purification or filtering the violence out of the water. And instead of it bearing ruin, it can bear, good promise and good future. So this was kind of also, from my wishful thinking at least, you know, something that really tends to some of the desires, I guess, the political desires that we have, that we still can't have the means to sort of reflect directly onto our built environment.
I think I'll stop here for the sake of time, just to allow for any questions.
Thanks very much, Ola.